Welcome to Fatherhood Field Notes podcast, where I interview incredible fathers, gaining wisdom from their stories for you and I to grow in our craft. I'm your guide, Ned Shout, father to 5 kiddos, currently ages 12 to 19, and husband to my rad wife, Sarah, working on our 21st year of marriage. So yes, my friend, I am in the thick of it. I am in this with you, and I am working daily to rebel against the low expectations for fathers and create a world where fathers know who they are as they show up for their families. You and I have the greatest opportunity to impact our world generationally through the way we embrace our fatherhood role. This episode is brought to you by The Adventure of Fatherhood, helping men discover their powerful fatherhood role and build their fatherhood skills. The role of the father is to serve, guide, steward, protect, and of course, find joy and have fun in the messiness of it all. Today's guest is my new friend, Tim Campbell. I don't even know what to say. This was so unexpected. He is truly an incredible man. His heart, his life, his decisions. He is inspiring. He is an author. He is a husband, and he is a loving father with an incredible joy for life. Enjoy meeting my friend, Tim. All right, Tim, welcome to Fatherhood Field Notes. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. How are you feeling today?
Fine. Thank you, Ned. Thanks for having me. Feeling great.
Yes, we're going to have a good time. All right, Tim, my first question right out the gate is, how old do you find yourself today?
Well, in my mind, I'm in my 40s or 50s, but on my birth certificate, I'll turn 82 next month.
Oh my goodness, that's incredible. Well, happy early birthday, 82. Wow, as you step into this kind of like post-season, right? Like, I mean, we're going to talk about some of the incredible work you're doing right now. But what's on your mind as you step into, like, you past 65, past the 70s, and now you're in your 80s? What do you look at as the next 10 years? Like, what is important to you?
It's a great question. I mean, a lot of it is looking back and reflection. I mean, as to why I wrote the book. And my particular story with the kids is a cathartic one. It was like a lot of emotional stuff, tears on the keyboard, when I was writing and stuff like that. But now I feel like I have a couple of more books in me. Looking back on my professional life also. Yeah, I was in the Peace Corps in the 60s. I have a manuscript on that I want to work on. So it's being with the family, being with the kids, reflecting back and trying to pay back a little bit by putting it on the page.
Yeah, I love that. The paying back, that season of that. That's so good. I talk about this a lot on my podcast. Is I feel as though in some regard, and maybe you can give me your feedback, is being the generation I think we should be looking to, is I feel like sometimes I'm 42, that, 30 and 40 and maybe even early 50s, we're not necessarily gaining the wisdom and knowledge we have access to from those who are in their 70s and 80s. And what I find is like conversations like this are so meaningful to me because you have so much to offer because of a life lived. Do you feel that the 30s and 40s are looking to you for wisdom to be passed down?
I see it from time to time. Yes, that questioning look, the sort of the tell me stare. But I must say, and I'm happy to share whenever the opportunity arises. I mean, podcasts like yours are terrific for this, I think, for gaining wisdom. But the other side of it is, or another angle on it is that, we're always looking back. And we'll get more into this later on when we're in our conversation. But like, for instance, learning from my father, I look back and try to correct the template that he left me to be a father and sort of making adjustments and corrections for my kids and the circumstances. But I'm always looking back at that. And we always have to look back a little bit to history. And we learn something from history, but also we make mistakes because what we're living with in the present is very different from the past. I was born in 43 and, I was, say, 5 to 15. You can do 48 to whatever, to 58 or 63. Well, no, that math's not quite right. But in any case,
yeah, I get you.
The point is the current circumstances, particularly today with online life, social media, TikTok, Instagram and stuff, it just requires a different set of tools, different emphasis.
Yeah. And that's why I think in some regards, it's unfortunate that, I just use an example of, I remember being in a mobile store like a Verizon or something, and an older gentleman being there, and the worker just seems so annoyed with the questions. And to me, it was this awareness of like, we're thinking we need technology wisdom, but at the end of the day, like, life is about relationships. Life is about connection. And so this leads me to my next question is, okay, so you're married. I kind of asked you this before. How many years have you been married?
Yeah. So we celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary, July 5th this summer. Yeah.
My hope is that there's kind of a revitalization around this. But, when I'm 82, what will be the percentage of people who can say they've been married 50 years? My hope is that we get better at it, but the way that things seem is that we're not working on that as much as we should be. So with that, I mean, you've been married longer than I've been alive. I should be looking to you to go, give me some nuggets. So if you were speaking to your 50-year-old self, what were the things that you'd say, hey, just hold on to, these things if you want to maintain a 50-year marriage?
Yeah, Ned, they're already at the core of your podcast and your value system. I can see it. I mean, it's like our kids are becoming every day, and you have to sort of attend to that becoming. And you look at the long game. You understand that family is everything, and you need to hold on to that and value and cherish it, And I think you're spot on already in that area. And the other thing is you don't have to win every argument, okay, with your spouse. Okay. You can give a little ground. That's part of the long game. You understand, or don't, pick which fights you want to take. I don't know if those are nuggets, but as I look back, those are things, even today, my wife will bring up something and I'll say, yeah, you're right, honey, but let's talk about that, kind of thing.
Yeah. So Linda, you guys have been married 50 years. What's something that you love about Linda?
Her perseverance,
Mm.
There's some passages in the book, Holding Up the Sky, is a memoir I wrote. Okay. So.
Yeah, so let's just give a shout out to this real quick. Tim just put out a book. It's going to be available on Amazon on October 1st. You can pre-order it now on your website. And I'm really excited to get into what it's about. But go on. I just want to make sure people know about it.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that. The opening chapters are about when my second daughter got sick. She was stricken by a viral infection of the heart when she was like 5 days old. Okay. The docs told me after she was admitted to the pediatric intensive care, they gave her a 1 in 10 chance of getting through the night. And there was even a moment when the doc, after the first week, she had another heart failure while she was in the PICU pediatric intensive care unit. And, it just looked increasingly grim. The doctors came to us one day and said, look, there's a room over here off the side of the intensive care unit where you can take your daughter in case she might not make it. And we'll unplug her. Even today, that memory is gut-wrenching. Linda, was like a rock. Okay. And then even after that, when Catherine was recovering, she had another heart failure. My father died the night she had her third heart failure. Linda was home expressing milk for me to take to the, we're shuttling back and forth to the Oakland Children's Hospital, and I'm putting the nipple in my baby's mouth, and I can see her respond. It was like magic, And Linda did that. And it was the most important medicine my daughter ever had. And right up to this day, she's just been a rock. Sometimes, honestly, it pisses me off because I'm a little too hard. She's hard on me or hard on the kids, But that's part of the 50-year deal,
Yeah, I love it.
That's the thing. I mean, I just admire her so much because she had so much strength. And of course, she buckled as well. And I held her up at other times. But that's the thing that sort of keeps couples going. You're by their side and you're there if they need you and if I need them. So that's one of the outstanding things about Linda.
Now, I know we're going to get into this. You wrote a book. It's a reflection on raising your 3 kids. And before we do, I just don't want to miss this question. I know that there's, even hearing it now, there's a lot of heaviness. There's a lot of heartache. There was a lot of, this isn't how we thought it was going to go. And before we move into that, my question is, do you have any feedback or reflections on going through those things with Linda, right? Because you can look at these milestone things that happen in our lives that can just really separate people. But when you go through something so intense with another human, there's this emotional bonding that you have with them. Any thoughts on how that has unified you and Linda in a way that you would never be connected to another human being, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think it's really an excellent question. And yes, I think that it's like in the heat of the battle kind of thing,
Yeah, exactly.
Where you meld your souls a little bit. And because you're both struggling so much to support your daughter and help her to survive. And so, yes, I think that's there. I think it's the sense that we are in it together, that, Linda's a psychologist and she works with children of divorce. She knows all the statistics. At the time we were married, half the marriages in California ended in divorce. Okay. And so we understand what our society is like these days. It's more opportunities everywhere and people, eyes straying further afield to see maybe I should take advantage of that. And my marriage isn't the right thing for that and stuff. But I guess for me, I remember telling a friend of mine when I was in my 50s or 60s, something like this. Is that we have problems. I have problems. I mean, sometimes I'm really angry at Linda, but I know that I'll never leave her. I just sort of knew that from the beginning, that it was in that heat of battle kind of moment that you're putting your finger on that sort of kept us together. And I think it's really true. But the pediatrician who treated our daughter, who just lives 10 houses down the street from us, I see her every month almost. And,
Oh, wow.
I saw her recently and she said, I didn't think you were going to make it. I thought she was a goner. And she told me at another occasion that most of the families in your circumstances don't survive as a family. So it's kind of like, for me, there was never any question. I'm sticking with it. But I can understand why people split up. It just creates a lot of heartache, a lot of difficulty. It exaggerates all your differences. But we each have differences in the way we approach our children and how they should be handled, managed, participate in decision making and all that kind of stuff. And Linda and I are very different that way. It's funny because she has a mother who's very strong and authoritarian. My father was strong and authoritarian. She has a father who's a softie, and my mother was a softie. It's like there's certain symmetry there that I think worked for us. It may be one in a long shot, who knows? But
is there some sort of conviction you have about marriage being important?
Somewhat in a moral sense, yeah. Somewhat also in my value structure, but I wouldn't say that because you're the rebel, okay? And I would rebel against sort of dictums like that. Like, you got to stay married. That wasn't me. And I made a lot of mistakes in my life because I rebelled against stuff, professionally. I mean, when I got my education, I was studying for a PhD, and I went against the stream 2 or 3 different times. I paid a price for it. I succeeded in the end, but it was like, it would have been a lot easier if I hadn't rebelled that way. So it wasn't that I necessarily was rebelling against this dictum that, society says it's good, you should stay married forever. Okay. I understand why it is good. It's really important, particularly for the next generation, but it's also hard.
Yeah, well, we can wrap this part up, but I want men listening. I think that when you are in the heat of life's battle, right? There's so many battles in life. Don't look at we watch like a Navy SEAL movie and we're like, oh yeah, the band of brothers are together, and we get that. But I think sometimes when we're in a battle with our wife, for some reason, we almost like look at her as an enemy as well, instead of looking at, a companion in the ditch with us. If we could look at it that way, then the differences we have wouldn't matter so much.
Very good point.
And I just think that we need that. And you said it, right? It's for the next generation is really important. All right, Tim, you have 3 kiddos, and your book that you're putting out right now, Holding Up the Sky, is really a reflection on raising them. Tell me a little bit about your 3 kids.
Okay, so we gave birth to Alana, the oldest, in 1978, and she was like right off the bat. She was like a rainbow that popped out. She was bright and beautiful and immediately, reactive to us and stuff. And my first 3 years of fatherhood were a dream. It was just a dream. It was wonderful. Partly because I worked at home. I was a consultant and did some writing and stuff, so I could be there. I could drive carpool. I could change diapers. I could, take her almost every day. We could go do something. And then Catherine came along 3.5 years later. And in the moment I was the president of both the girls' births, and, she popped out in 2 hours flat. I mean, Catherine was ready to go. Linda was in labor for only 2 hours. And she was looking around the room almost as a newborn. I thought, oh God, here's another one, just like her older sister. But in the first 5 days, she got this viral infection of the heart. So she suffered brain damage from brain anoxia. She had kidney issues. She had heart failure problems. She suffered a hearing loss, still wears hearing aids. She got epilepsy, so it was like a catastrophe in a lot of ways. It changed our lives. As I mentioned earlier, she wasn't expected to live. And then the couple of years after her birth, our home became kind of a clinic. Because she was getting meds 24 hours a day. We had to check, every couple hours, she had to get different kinds of meds. And so it was very, very hard, very difficult. And that's another sort of tie back to Linda being so strong, because she was there and she, kept that thing going. And I was struggling to make a living even then, so like I had to take off work for like 3 months just to take care of the kid. And then 3.5 years later, Eric was born. Okay, so the son arrives. Hooray! And we're thinking for the first like year, we called Eric Mr. Wonderful because he was so much easier than his older sister. No problems whatsoever. Until after somewhere 15 months or 18 months, something like that, we discovered he had a serious hearing loss, more serious than his older sisters. So it was like, and nobody knows where it came from. Nobody knows where Catherine's viral infection came from. We were told at the time there were like 4 other cases in Northern California of this viral myocarditis that had the preference for the hearts of newborn females, and all the others died. That we couldn't ever trace any connection in terms of location, geography, or, we never came into contact with them that anybody ever knew. And the fact that she had a hearing loss and Eric had a hearing loss, there's also no connection. There's no hearing loss in our family. It wasn't genetic. So it's just like a couple of strikes of lightning. I mean, I have a chapter, one of the chapters in the book is lightning strikes, watch out. So those are the 3 kids, but Eric has an IQ equal, as high as his oldest sister, Alana. They're gifted. So I had 2 gifted kids and 2 disabled kids. Eric is both, 3 kids. So that was the family. And, we were in the approaching $1 million in hospital costs for the intensive care for Catherine. And I was a consultant with lots of bubbles in income stream, and I needed something. And Linda was saying, okay, your turn. And, she had been working in Children's Hospital in San Francisco. She had a steady job. She had health insurance, but she was coming to the end of the thing. So we agreed, okay, my turn. I'm taking over. I'll get the job. I applied. I got 3 offers. They're all on the East Coast. So I had to pull up stakes out of Berkeley, which was not easy.
Yeah. Yeah. Doctors and everything. Yeah.
Yeah. The whole community. So a lot of the story takes place on the East Coast and in around Washington, D.C. And the last half of the story, we moved back to the same house we had left. Yeah. It took, I figured, okay, Washington, we'll stay there 5-6 years, build up my Rolodex, of contacts and be able to do better consulting and all that kind of thing. But we stayed 25 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because I got it was the World Bank. I worked at the World Bank. It was an amazing organization. And, one of my colleagues at Berkeley said, I said, I'll stay there 5 or 6 years, something like that. He said, no, man, write it out, take a pension. I said, no way. There's no way I'm going to do that. It's not me. There I was, 25 years. I stayed. I'm so glad now, the house was paid off 20 years ago. Yeah. So the story is all about attending to the divergent needs of the kids. Their mismatches in play dates and schools and holidays and medicines and therapies and hearing aids. And, it was like never enough to-do lists, to keep track of everything that had to be done. So that's holding up the sky.
So tell me, what was the motivation, the reason, why write the book? When somebody reads it, holds it, comes to the end, what is it that you want them to have learned or gained from it?
Yeah, Ned, I don't want to be so presumptuous that there are lessons here. I didn't write it as a self-help or here's your lessons. This is what you have to do. No, it's not that. It's more a reflection of this is my life. This is what I went through. And maybe I'm saying this only quietly and not even very, sort of out there. Maybe you'll learn something from this too. I don't know. I hope so. Okay. But I think that for me, it was, I mentioned earlier, it was a cathartic experience. I began taking notes or just writing things down. And so did Linda, right from the day Alana was born, she wrote things of developmental milestones of things that she was doing, her first words and her, the artwork and, school achievements and stuff like that. And the same held true for the other kids. Of course, it was a lot more difficult later on with Catherine, but a lot of note taking had been done. And after, I retired from the World Bank in 2005. So I'd already had a fair amount of work on the page. And so it took me, say, I don't know, from 95 to 2005, I got the corpus of the book down. It took 10 years to write. And then there was a lot of polishing and sifting and what title this, how do I change that, and all kinds of stuff. I mean, it's a ton of work.
Yeah, love it. I would love for you to share 3 stories, if you don't mind. One story about each kid that would kind of connect us to you, who you are, to your kid in the fatherhood.
Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. So probably the story with Alana, the oldest, when she was 4 years old, the night her grandfather died, my father died. I had just come home from the hospital and Catherine had just survived her 3rd heart failure, and I discovered almost when I looked at my dad's the report about his death. It took place within the hour that I was sitting next to Catherine when she was going through a seizure. And the nurse had called me into the room. I was sleeping at the hospital. She called me into the room. She said, look, I'm not sure she's going to get through this night. She's beginning to seize. You better come. So there I am, like 4:30 in the morning, holding her quivering little hand. And 100 miles away, my dad is in convulsions from a heart attack that killed him. And so that next day, I had to tell Alana about the loss of her grandfather when her baby sister, is still in the hospital and on the doorway of death. And at that moment, I felt like I had to hold up my arms because I felt like the sky could fall on me. So that's where the title comes from. So like 6 months later, Catherine's been very ill. Alana's been abandoned a lot because we had to give so much attention to her sister.
Yeah.
I found some times to just be alone with Alana. One day we went over to the Golden Gate Bridge. We went under the Golden Gate Bridge. I had done this many times as a graduate student. In those days, you could do it. You can't do it anymore after 9/11. I went under the Golden Gate Bridge and we were looking up and it was just a fabulous, magical day. Okay. Daddy and daughter under the Golden Gate Bridge, the shimmering Pacific out there, and we find these all kinds of detritus under the bridge, a Raggedy Ann doll, antenna from a radio, a piece of paper from somebody's diary, and then these rivets. We found these rivets. They're heavy, sort of international orange rivets, that hundreds of them lying in the grass that had been, fallen from the bridge. The workers misstruck them or whatever, and they felt they'd been lying there a long time. And rivets, gee, they're heavy. Can we take them? Yeah, let's take them home. You pick 3, I'll pick 3. Let's take them home. And then it hit me. We'd gone on that outing because across the bridge in Sausalito was a psychiatrist where we had taken Alana to support her and give her help. And so that was the same afternoon we're under the bridge. And it hit me. I've just taken my daughter to a psychiatrist. And here she's giving me therapy. She's holding up these rivets. They're magic holding together things, she called them, which is like just what the doctor ordered at that moment. So that was, Alana now she's a brain scientist at a university in the East Coast. She sort of helped me get through. A quicker story about Catherine is, there are tons of them. I think maybe to switch gears a little bit, but by the time she was 20, Catherine today swims 2 miles 5 days a week. She flexes her arms like this, like the Popeye. Just look at these guns, Dad. She's incredibly fit. She can live independently, almost, not quite. So it's like she's 10 blocks away. She has her own apartment, but it's like every day. We kind of have to check in, be careful.
How old is she?
Today she's 43.
Wow.
When she was 20, we were on a small cruise, a small boat. There was a disco. It's 8:00. Dad, can I go to the dance floor? She's 20 years old. And I'm thinking, my God, should I let her go by herself? And my son, Eric, who was then 17, looked at me and he says, time to take a risk, Dad.
That could give me chills, just that. Wow. Okay.
So I let her go. But a half hour later, I went into the disco and hung in the background out of the lights and watched the guys come up, ask her to dance. And my heart is pounding. I felt like, talk about a Navy SEAL. I said, don't even think about it with my daughter, kind of thing. But she got through it, but she was there by herself, waiting for people to ask her to dance. And they drifted away after a while. Really, that was a kind of a hard one to take too, because they could tell after a while. First place in a disco, she can't hear anything. Okay. Even maybe the music, but not anybody's conversation. So it was like, how is she going to get through this? But she did manage to get through. And I went back to our little cabin and, 15 minutes later, I hear a thud at the door and she walks in and I said, in the dark, how'd it go, honey? She said, it was fine. And no problem. She says, no. She says, it was a little like the first job I got. She said, I said, what do you mean? When I was a counselor at the camp, the counselor's helper at the camp. I said, oh yeah. She says, yeah, tonight, like then, I know what I was doing. She said, I know what I was doing. So, Catherine pulled through. And then Eric is a strapping guy, he's like 6'1" and weighs 210, and it's just, he's got the size of an elephant trunk, he's this huge, beefy guy, athletic. But his hearing loss was a very difficult situation for him, particularly in high school. It's very competitive. He was in a competitive high school. He couldn't hear a lot of things. He was ostracized, little girl came up when he was like in third grade, okay, before high school, but in third grade, girl comes up and cuts in line in front of him. They're on the playing field. They're waiting to take turns to do something. And he says to her, hey, what's up? And she turns around and looks at his hearing aids and she says, I'm perfect and you're not. Yeah. So, Eric and Kathy both, had this stigma of hearing aids and a little bit slurred speech, and it was very difficult for them. But at his graduation in high school, the headmaster of the high school, you have to picture an assembly of kids in a bowl, 100 yards wide, 30 feet deep. It's like a Greek theater, okay? And all the kids that are graduating are down on the bottom, and the headmaster's up on top and giving a speech. And he recognized everybody for all the wonderful things they did. And then he said, and now we come to our annual award of the most fearless kid in school. And he talked about wrestling, and he talked about somebody who was in the chorus, who, even though he couldn't hear very well, immediately I knew he was talking about Eric. Had no idea that this was going to happen, and Eric, the faculty told me later, said it was unanimous. They voted on it, was a unanimous award for Eric. And so it was like the kids found a way, despite the stigma and the difficulties and the parents not knowing what the hell to do, It's always difficult to know where to draw the line on disciplinary issues when your kids have these disabilities. It's just like the thing that bothered me the most as a father. Am I being too hard? Sometimes it was too hard. I knew it was, I could hear my father's voice, coming out of my mouth. And Linda would say, you let him go too easily on other occasions. Oh, that was the biggest challenge, I think. And those are the stories of 3 kids.
First off, thank you. Not just for the stories, but Tim, your heart is so beautiful to be talking about your kids when they were in elementary school and they're in their 40s now, and it still moves you. That's the kind of man that I want to be.
Thank you. Thank you.
When you share these stories about your kids, I mean, it's clear from, I don't know you. Nobody listening knows you, but it's inspiring to go, okay, well, you did something right when they were kids, right? And so I first want to lean into well, how did you parent? And maybe you can, I'll give you a second to think about, a couple of reflections you might give. You did kind of mention okay, the disciplinary. I'm wrestling. Is it too hard? Is it too easy? I did it right, quote unquote, right this time, wrong that time. I think at least what I'm hearing is it's less about the action. It's more about the heart. And if you're wrestling after the moment, I was too easy on them or I was too hard on them, that's almost the posture of a father. Is you're in the game, right? You're wanting to reflect on them each and every moment. Did I do that well? And I want to show up well for them next time and next time and next time. So I think it comes down to this heart. And so I guess it seems like you're a very selfless man. I know when asked the question, most people are like, yeah, we know how selfish we are because we know our own thoughts and stuff like that, whatever. But how would you encourage, advise, suggest to us 30, 40-year-olds who are in the thick of it to die a little bit more to our selfishness so that we can have this heart of the Father? Anywhere you want to go with it. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, another excellent question, Ed. The answer that I would give you is you give it to the kids. Discipline is a noun, not a verb. Okay. It's a thing you want to strive for, but you don't, you have to, in my view, okay, if I'm looking back, if the kids have done something wrong, when I tracked mud through my uncle's house when I was 5 years old, my dad whipped my butt with a leather belt. Okay. I would never do that. Never strike my kids ever. But instead, as I said earlier, they're becoming, they're learning, they're engaging in a wider world that they can, it's difficult to understand, particularly when they have disabilities like my kids did. So I would level with them. Okay. Come down eye to eye, well, you realize what you did here? Okay, let's take the tracking through the mud thing. They didn't do it, but look, let's take that example. It's going to require some work to clean this up, and you're going to help. You should help us. Clean this up. You can't do it all, but you'll help. And look at them in the eye and try to understand, that it was a wild in the moment. They were gay and fun and they weren't paying attention. Okay. You got to pay attention sometimes. You got to honor other people's property. You honor your own property, kind of stuff. And I think behind all of this, I think that what happened with that kind of approach is that in the end, the one thing that I have with these kids is trust. They trust me right to the end. Okay. And to this day, my 2 daughters call me every day. And Eric he's out there on his own a little bit more. But when we talk, we always end our phone calls. Love you, Dad. I love you too, Eric. I think it's engaging them in the discipline, okay, in what it means to have discipline and what it means to observe and follow rules, follow the order of the house, respect others, in your family and in your community, that kind of deal.
What I'm hearing is first, if we're going to put this some sort of like, we're writing out a structure for people, trust is a thing. But then when you talk about discipline, what I'm really understanding is I think sometimes dads get stuck because they feel like I have to discipline my kid. Like, the old, like, okay, I got home from work, who needs spanked kind of thing. I don't know that necessarily happens as much these days. We've probably moved away from that a little bit too much, probably. But the point is, you said a couple words, respect. So are we teaching our kids respect? Are we teaching them discipline? It's less about, am I disciplining them, but am I teaching them to have discipline? And a word you use that I like, even I think is more helpful, is order, right? It's like rules aren't just to have, like the 10 Commandments aren't just like, I'm going to strike you down if you don't do these. They were a way of life. Don't sleep with your neighbor's wife because you're probably not going to be friends with your neighbor if you do that. Don't steal his stuff because he's probably not going to trust you. It comes down to order, and you can only have order if you're willing to not operate as a selfish human being and have an overall discipline for yourself. And if everybody does that, then we're stopping at red lights and going at green lights, and we're working together.
Right. It's living in a community, living in a family, living in a community, Your fist stops where my nose begins kind of thing. Yeah.
I like that. Tim, one of the questions I tend to ask people is, when did you embrace fatherhood? But I want to shift this. You can kind of answer it based on that. But when did you embrace fatherhood? Was it like the moment you hear you're going to be a dad? Was it at the delivery? You said this first year was this like, or the first 3 years was like dad heaven, right? It's like the best thing you could imagine. But my question is the heart of the father. Like, Tim, your kids are adults, and you are still brought to an emotional state speaking about a situation at third grade. If more men had this heart of the father, our world would look different. So my question to you is, this tender, vulnerable heart of a father, where did this come from? Can we recreate it? Or how do we tap into it as men?
Yeah, well, let's see. That's a tough one. First place, I'm no saint. Okay.
I'm asking you to solve the world's problems right now.
Yeah, I'm not going to solve the world's problem. I can barely solve my own problems. I'm no saint. I have plenty of, faults and stuff. But I think to go straight to the first part of the question is, when did I embrace fatherhood? I think there was an incident with my dad when I was 15. He said that the car's not starting, pour some gas directly into the carburetor while I turn it over. He said, he gave orders. He was a Marine. Okay. He wasn't making a polite request. He gave me the red can of gas with a spout on it. I opened the hood, he's cranking the car and pouring the gas into a gash of flame immediately erupts from the carburetor, reaching for the spout. It could have exploded in my hand. I threw it back. It reacted quickly, but I smelled combusted gas. It went to the pit of my stomach. I was shocked, And my father, he was a bit of an authoritarian type, he didn't have the tools to be a father. He didn't have the tools to teach, He watched his house burn down when he was an infant from a field. His dad had to leave. This is back in 1919. This is way up in Weed, California. His father had to leave, go back to do lumberjacking to try to save the family. Meanwhile, my grandmother raised eventually 8 brothers and sisters, on her own. The dad never returned. Then the depression happened. It was a disaster. And my dad was always kind of very defensive, cautious, watch out, bad stuff can happen. But that moment of the gas can thing, I made a vow then, I'm not going to be this kind of dad. That's when it didn't embrace fatherhood, but it was a signal to me that there can be a different way to do it. Okay. One other thing I think is important about the heart business, it goes hand in hand with not letting your aggressive reactions after, you've been working, 50 hours a week and you get home and the kids are, the house is burning down. Okay. And you got to impose discipline. I learned when I was in the Peace Corps. I was in the Peace Corps in Costa Rica in the 60s. Okay. One night I'm walking home late at night it's like 4:00 in the morning after a party. A dog is approaching from the other side of the street. And I had experience with strays at night. You got to be careful. Okay. So I'm watching the dog. I'm going north. Dog's coming south on the other side of the street. I turn around to check the dog after we pass. He crosses the street and comes across the scent of a woman in my trail. Okay. And the dog immediately stops. He jerks around, his fur comes up, he starts snarling, he's baring his teeth, like the ruffles on his nose are all, growling like mad, and he leaps forward to attack, I'm like petrified. There's nobody around, there's no help, I can't run. And the next thing I know, there are two animals growling in the street. I'm growling louder than the dog is. Okay. The vocal eruption out of my throat was so intense, I couldn't control it. I could feel the air coming out of my, windpipe and stuff, and my fists were clenched, and I couldn't control it. I'm aware of it, but I couldn't do anything about it. And the dog backed down. Okay. And I realized at that moment, that I had, and I think men have, a phantom captain inside of them. The phantom captain comes alive. It's an evolutionary thing. When you're attacked or you're under threat, you either fight or flee or freeze. Okay. Was ready to fight back. I had no say whatsoever cerebrally in my reaction. It was completely evolutionary. It was like the lizard response, okay? But then I realized my dad could not control this phantom captain. Of course, I can't control the phantom captain, but I can anticipate when the phantom's going to appear. I call him phantom because he comes and goes like a ghost, okay? And captain because when he's here, he's in charge. I'm not in charge. You know what I mean? It's like that growling in the street. So the phantom captain, I can be aware when the phantom's going to come, and I can either take a couple of deep breaths, try to reflect a little bit, don't dive into the fight if you don't have to, this is going to happen as part of being a human being. Women, by the way, I think are different. They react in a different way. They tend to things and befriend and hold hands and talk about it, or men are like attack or retreat, one of them. So I don't know if it's the heart that comes out, but at least the phantom captain is not always the first reaction or the one that predominates. Okay. So when I was writing the book, this stuff began to come to mind. And then I began to think about, I can think of a number of other times when the phantom saved me. I was falling asleep as a teenager driving a truck on a country road, and I woke up looking straight at a tree that I was about ready to hit. I woke up out of a sleep. I'm convinced the phantom woke me up, okay? And I slammed on the brakes and I didn't collide with the tree. Or even when I was a toddler, I learned from others and remember myself. One of my first memories is bubbles going up in front of my face with a blue hazy background. I'd fallen into a swimming pool as a toddler with a babysitter who lost track of me, and somebody pulled me out, but I'm sure the phantom was there sort of slowing the heartbeat, and stopping the breathing until I got saved. It was those kinds of stories. There are half a dozen of them. So maybe I'm making too much of this phantom captain thing, but it comes to your question about, how do I embrace fatherhood and where does the heart come from? It's like we have to be aware of ourselves and the way we react to situations and circumstances. And sometimes when we're least prepared to be the good person that is required for our children, we have to sort of then, let me just get a little perspective, a little distance from the situation, take a breath, and remember they're becoming, and remember we need to, have trust in the situation.
Well, I'll tell you a couple things that I'm hearing. I hear the phantom captain, in a positive and a negative light. The summary thing too is that I feel one of the things you're saying is like, men are extremely powerful, right? Like we are powerful, and that's really good in circumstances where I'm going to get, attacked by a dog. It's not so good when my 3-year-old tracks mud in the house, right? So being able to, I think men, a big question right now, I think people are asking is like, what is masculinity? What does it look like? And I think one of the things, I've heard 3 things from you that I'd like to bring up. One of them is you are incredibly powerful. So knowing that, teach yourself to take a step back and assess the situation before you respond. Don't react, respond. And how do I need to use my power right now? How do I use this? The other 2 things I just want to point out so I don't miss them is you made 2 decisions in life. And I think that something missed is that as a man, I'm sure you made way more decisions, but 2 that I wanted to pick up on. As a man, you can make decisions. So if you're listening to this right now, you have the power to make a decision and then live your whole life following behind it, like staying true to that. Now, obviously, there's good decisions and bad decisions. So don't be a stick in the mud and make a terrible decision and just stick with it to stick with it. But 2 decisions I've seen you make, Tim. One is at 15 years old, which do we give 15-year-olds credit right now? No, like these are young men. They're becoming, so let's treat them that way. You made a decision. I'm going to be a great father. Look at you. 65 years later, 67 years later, you are true to that 15-year-old. You made a decision and then you lived a life proving it. That to me is the definition of a man. Then the other one is marriage, right? You made a decision 50 years ago, I'm going to do this, and you lived it out 50 years and you got more time to go. Men make decisions and then live a life proving to you and everyone else around it. And you need it, your soul needs it, your heart needs it, your kids need it, and future generations need us men to make some freaking decisions and then stick with them. It is important.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tim, you talked about your dad. I typically ask people what's something you really appreciated about your dad and what's something you wish he did differently. Kind of shared some things you wish he did differently. You can expand on it if you want, but what's something you really appreciated about your dad?
Well, I appreciate he survived the life that he had.
Yeah.
And I was even aware of this, in elementary school and high school, hearing the stories, riding the freight trains across the Sierras and through snow, in a boxcar to get to college. It's like, come on. It doesn't get any better than that. And the fact that he, provided for the family but it wore him down. Like my dad traveled every week by car throughout Northern California, worked for Farmers Home Administration, helping farmers, get loans to do water, irrigation, whatever, worked his butt off. And that work ethic, it's hard to beat. Of course, there was the downside of it. It got pretty dark on the weekends. Dad would come home Friday, talk about coming home, Friday night at 6:00. Dad come home from a 250-mile drive Friday night at 8:00, and is no mood to be a clown. I mean, he was like worn down. And that went on for, decades. We butted heads a lot, but I didn't challenge Dad enough. I think this is a little bit off of your question, but I think it bears repeating. Sometimes I'm going to say this in a very metaphorical way, that in a very abstract way. In some ways, we have to kill our dads. And by that, I mean, you have to challenge them because you've become to a certain point a person yourself. And some of the things your dad is doing are not right, like the gasoline can incident. Okay. I never challenged him at 15. I would have gotten knocked down. Okay. And my brother did get knocked down. So I saw that. My brother's 2.5 years older than me. So I could see that was happening. And I think it was a mistake that I never challenged him. In the book, I closed the book with a chapter of a conversation with my dad, where I give him his due and admit, that I've made mistakes and that he made mistakes with me. And that he said, yes, I understand. And, in his later life, in his 50s and 60s, when the pressure for survival is, and providing for us decreased, we grew closer and we hugged and we were, it was much nicer, much softer, much easier. But your podcast and my book in the early stages is about being a father and helping our kids when they're little, So when you're 60 years old, it's a little bit too late for all of that,
Sort of, but when your dad was 50, 60 and you're 25 to 35 and he hugs you and apologizes. Obviously, it didn't change, the incident at 15, but it still did something for you in your relationship with him, even though you weren't a kid anymore.
That's true. Absolutely right.
And I only say that for the men. It's like, it still matters. I'm 42 and I still care what my dad says about me or feels about me. And I think it's important for us to know that if your kid's 5 or 25, because there's time for you to reconcile. I mean, I think a lot of what life is about is reconciliation on the messiness of it all.
Very good.
Something, though, that you said, and I just want to, this is like a very cool kind of feels full circle. My son's 16, and I'm very aware that I have this kind of 2-year window to really connect with him. I have 4 daughters and 1 son, and really lead him. There's these conflicts that we are having, but it's important, I think, for me to realize that in some senses, he does have to kind of kill me off. Our relationship's going to be different in 5 years than it is today. I won't be his rule guy anymore. And I want to just give opportunity for us to invite our kids, when it's appropriate, dads, to have your kids challenge you. To challenge you. I think that can be good for you and for them because you're being vulnerable with them enough to let them speak into your life. And the reason I said it's full circle is I think of the moment that Eric said, Dad, time to give, let her go to the disco.
Right.
He, for some reason, he was a big enough or good brother to his sister. And he felt comfortable enough with you to say,
yeah,
let go a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. That's a soft challenge. It's a good example, I think, of what you're pointing out. You don't want to go to a 15 or 16 or 17-year-old and say, okay, challenge me if you don't think. That's not the way to do it, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. You got to look for the right circumstances and maybe even be passive about it and draw them out in a way. Yeah. Even when I was writing the book, Eric in the end said, Dad, to tell you the truth, I love your book, but there are a couple of things you really need to change. So, okay, Eric, let's talk about it. And so he was absolutely right. And I made the changes. I asked him, I said, you give me the sentences you want to see, and I'll put them in. And I did. So that's another example, I think, a way to do it. Challenging the dad is like passing the torch almost, isn't it? I mean, you're saying your son's 16, pretty soon he's going to be 18, and he's going to be off on his own, and you want him to have all the standing that you have, all the vision and the wisdom that you have.
Yes. Tim, our time together has been truly incredible. Like, this conversation is life-shaping for me. One of the things I highlighted in the information you sent over to me in the Google form I sent you is you were talking about your book and talking about your reflection, and really you're talking about your life. You said, I delve into the pain and joy of fatherhood. And that just really, it really stuck out to me, that there's a lot of joy in fatherhood, and then there's a lot of pain in fatherhood. And clearly you've had, some deep experience with that due to your circumstances. But thank you for putting the work out there. I can't wait to read the book. And I'm so grateful for the man you are, the heart you are. I need to know men like you. And so do every other father my age.
Thank you.
So I hope that your book, I hope your message, I hope your story gets out there to thousands, and that it helps us fathers to have a heart similar to yours.
Thank you, Ned.
Tim, incredible. Any last thoughts before we wrap up here? And where can people find more information on you?
Thank you. You've been a great interviewer. You posed some really great questions.
Thank you.
I hope our conversation was helpful in some way. The book is available for pre-order. That'd be the best way out as an ebook. It's holdingupthesky.net. On the 1st of October, the paperback edition and Audible edition will also be available.
Oh, great.
By going to the pre-order, that it pumps up the numbers a little bit and gets me a little more visibility. So I hope you understand the marketing twist there.
Oh, yeah.
That's it. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ned. I really enjoyed the conversation also. You have a great program.
Thank you. What an incredible conversation. I mean, I am still just kind of grinning and feel full of life, feel invigorated from the conversation. I mean, we need 82-year-old Tim speaking into us. We need him writing his book, sharing his life, jumping on a podcast with me, continuing to learn and grow and stretch so that he could pour into us. What I really got from him is this tender heart towards your kids. Okay, that's one thing. Just this tenderness towards your kids. Let's cultivate that. And we have the power to do so by the way we speak to them, the way we talk to them, the way we think about them in our lives. Also, side note, how inspiring, 50 years of marriage. Like, what a sweetheart, how much he loves his wife. Like, let's get in the game, dudes. Let's get in the game. We can do this. And then I do just love these kind of, at least the pieces that I pulled from this, is what does it mean to be a man? This idea that you have power to make decisions and then to stand by them for a lifetime. We're not talking short-term gains. We're talking decades behind a decision. At 15, I'm going to be a good dad. And at 82, you're tearing up thinking about your kid in the 3rd grade. And this dude is a man. And this, my friends, is what I inspire to be. Dude, if these conversations are helpful, inspiring, you're enjoying them, please write a review. It helps spread the word that fatherhood matters. Please send this to a friend. Every father who has kids in the house needs to hear just the opportunity they have to be like a Tim. So share this with a friend. Thank you. Thank you to all you dads out there listening to Fatherhood Field Notes podcast. What you do matters. Don't be like everybody else. Be yourself. That's who your kid, spouse, and community needs. This is your guide, Ned Shout. Together, let's rebel against the view that fatherhood has little impact, and let's create lives engaged in mastering the craft of fatherhood. Much love to you, my brothers. I look forward to hanging out with you next time.